Hello, and welcome to today's live reading of Absolution by Anise Storm, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bit. Prologue, Dominic, Las Vegas, Nevada. The sun had long ago set, and daylight had given way to darker skies, but the sultry heat from earlier in the day still remained. The sweat coating my temple and chest made my shirt sticky, so I shed the t-shirt as soon as I arrived at the Rutherford estate. It was inside of a secured gated community, but there was no way someone like Grant Rutherford would ever give a kid like me gate access from so far east of his affluent neighborhood. The estate was located in Summerlin North and was close proximity to the world-renowned TPC golf course in an area the locals dubbed Billionaires Row. I'd always been very athletic, but golf wasn't one of the sports I'd played. The closest I had gotten to the links was last summer when I had gotten a job for a few months as a caddy. It was then I had come to know the very man on whose property I was now encroaching. I'd been quickly replaced in a matter of weeks, but by then I had already accomplished something I'd never even meant to do. I'd caught the interest of his only daughter, Juliana, and the attraction had been mutual from the start. Papa is absolutely livid, she'd coo into my ear as she would torment the very man with the power to send me back to my side of the city. It'll teach him. What will it teach him? I'd asked one of those days as I nuzzled her neck. To tell me no about something, she'd replied breathlessly, the citrus scent reminiscent of my youth when I would help my grandparents pick oranges during those humid Florida summers. They'd been some of the better memories of the childhood I had, and ones which still hurt me to this day. My grandmother had passed away from breast cancer when I was 12, and my grandfather died a few years later from renal failure. Once both were gone, it sent my mother spiraling until she met a man who didn't want the burden of helping her raise a 16-year-old. With nothing more than a letter and a few folded up $20 bills, I was left to fend for myself, which I had been doing for the last 3 years. It was what landed me at the country club and the host of other gigs I picked up just to make rent. I often worked 3 or 4 different jobs every week, and usually double shifts. My time at TPC had come to an end the same day her father caught us canoodling with one another between a cluster of trees. What did he deny you, Jules? I asked, knowing she was used to getting whatever it was that she wanted. Grant's 18-year-old daughter was the apple of his eye, and in a way, she was of mine as well. Her father was very influential in the community, having been in politics for several decades. I didn't follow that sort of thing, though. I had just graduated high school and was honestly just trying to survive. All of them were full of shit anyway, as my grandfather used to say. So what good did it do to waste my time on their packs of lies? You, Juliana told me, and my head whipped back. What about me? I asked. He told me I had to stop seeing you. Oh, I pulled away from her and went to take a few steps back. Well, where are you going? She'd stammered in question. I'm sure you wouldn't want to do anything to make your daddy take away your credit card, so it's fine. It's been real fun, but I don't want to give you up, Dom. I'd been shocked because for the first time in my life, it was as if someone had chosen me over something else. I'd only been seeing her for a few months, but I was in love with her. I wanted to say that she loved me too, and defying her father's wishes only confirmed it. But I was wrong about the defiance part, at least. I'm going to pretend to break up with you, then we can meet up later at the hotel. Before I could respond, she smacked me so hard that the side of my face stung like it'd been invaded by a swarm of fire ants or angry bees. I didn't know what to say, and I didn't really get the chance to think of anything either. Her father saw the encounter, and sure that his earlier impression of me was right, he'd told my boss I'd been hassling the guests, including Juliana. I was fired on the spot. I'd been livid because I had rent to pay, and had been close to the month's end. I wanted to tell him it wasn't what it looked like, but I instead held my head up high and walked away while my boss told me the cost of the shirt I was wearing would come out of my final paycheck. I flipped him a deuce, then I left with my dignity intact. I'd had second thoughts about meeting Juliana that night. Obviously, they hadn't been enough to make me stop seeing her, because I was still doing so all these months later. Grant thought he was being protective of her, but he didn't need to worry. I was so infatuated with the redhead that I'd never let anything bad happen to her. I would tell him as much if ever given the chance, but he'd likely find some other way to get rid of me. Still, it pissed me off, and after scaling the wall to her estate, I growled when rising to my feet. Cacti had been planted recently, and I hadn't known about them. Now I was cursing him and the girl I would soon be spanking for every spine I had to pull out of my pant leg. Thankfully, the jeans prevented them from penetrating my skin, but ridding myself of them would still be annoying. There you are, a voice said from the trees. I looked up, and as I often found myself doing, I just stared. Juliana was so fucking beautiful. She had long curly hair which fell halfway down her back. It was the shade of fire, and when it would cling to her face during sex, I would see it so close to her cerulean eyes, it was like staring into a flame. My cock hardened immediately, and I grunted as I quickly adjusted myself. A sliver of moonlight illuminated where she stood, and I saw nothing but her white bikini and some softly shaded silk robe. The strap was undone to it, revealing her breasts, which spilled out of the minuscule excuse of a top, and revealed all that freckled flesh I wanted to mark, taste, and touch. You're going to be the death of me, I warned as I removed the last spine from my denim and made my way closer to her. Once she was within arm's reach, I gripped the ends of her robe, then tugged her close. Where's the warden? I asked as I began to kiss my way to her chin. Dom, she moaned my name as my tongue swept over hers, then added, Papa is away for the night. I didn't have to ask where her mother was. If the woman wasn't in Europe or at some luxury spa retreat, she was with her husband. Either way, I knew Eloise wouldn't be here, so we had the entire place to ourselves. Jules, I groaned a second before capturing her lips with mine. My mouth moved hungrily over hers as my hands moved up and down her body. She was wearing a string bikini, so as my tongue dueled with hers, I was able to pull the ends apart, sending the material falling to the paved tile beneath us. She hiked up one leg, and I clutched it against me. I thrust my other hand between her thighs, and I could feel how wet she was. My fingers toyed with her entrance before I inserted 3 of them inside. Her head fell back, and as she whimpered, I devoured all the pale skin she revealed. This woman was like a drug to me. She intoxicated me like none other, and no fix would ever be enough. I kissed my way down to the breasts she thrust toward me. Within seconds, I removed my fingers so I could sweep her into my arms. I carried her over to the row of chaise loungers lined up alongside the pool. I sat down on one and pulled her on my lap. Feeling kinky tonight, Tom? She asked over her shoulder, and I grinned before delivering a blow to her perfectly rounded cheeks. But why? She cried out when another much harder strike followed. This is for not telling me about those damn cactus plants. I could have stabbed my fucking nuts on one of them. I'll have to look them over for you, she murmured, then mewed as I struck her again. She wiggled her ass a few times, and after giving her 2 more smacks, I lit her up. Juliana smirked at me, then dropped to her knees. She reached out with dainty hands, and in seconds, my cock was out of my pants and in the palm of one of them. I rose up enough to shrug my pants further down my legs, and by the time I kicked them off, she was stroking me more firmly. Let's see what the damage is, she told me cheekily, as I leaned back to let her do her worst. After all, Juliana wanted to be a nurse and was taking classes at UNLV. I growled the moment her warm mouth wrapped around my cockhead. She knew exactly how I wanted her to lick and suck on me, and she wasted no time taking my shaft to her throat. I weaved the fingers of one hand through her hair, tugging occasionally when she'd hit a sensitive spot. My girl knew how to pleasure a man, so it didn't take long before I was ready to explode. I didn't want to come in her mouth, so I finally yanked her head away from me and watched her lick her lips. She crawled onto my lap, and the heat from her wet pussy rubbed against me, which only enticed me further. I thrust 3 fingers back inside of her, and with lethal focus, I attacked the one spot that had her writhing atop me. I squeezed one of her breasts and enjoyed the sound of her ragged breathing as I drove her closer to the edge. Dom, she cried out moments before she exploded. Her cries joined the chorus of tree frogs in the distance, and I finger fucked her until her body stopped trembling. Juliana slumped against me, and now her damp hair was sticking not only to her gorgeous face, but my chest. which only reminded me of how fucking hot it was still outside. The water in the nearby pool beckoned to me, and it wasn't often I would get a chance to make use of one this nice. At the apartment complex where I currently lived, the damn thing was often filthy, and other residents had even found needles floating on the surface once or twice. My eyes darted up to the night sky, and beneath the sparkling canvas of stars, I decided to not waste the opportunity that presented itself. I shifted her slightly off me so I could slip out from under her. I found my jeans and grabbed the condom I usually kept in my wallet, then quickly sheathed my cock. Juliana glanced up at me, and after giving me a playful wink, she bolted from the chair and jumped into the pool. I had planned to bend her over the back of the chair and take her there first, but she evidently had the same idea I did earlier. Since I had no issue with fucking her in the Olympic-sized pool, I dove in after her. It didn't take long to corner her in the deeper section of it. I reached out and wrapped one hand around her throat as she wrapped her legs around me. I need to be inside of you so badly, Jules, I admitted. I need you. Before she could finish her sentence, I thrust inside of her, bearing my cock to the hilt. My hand tightened on her throat, and the way her eyes glazed over had me even harder. Prologue. Juliana. Yes, I breathed, my airway restricting as Dom squeezed my throat. I was free to get my freak on when with him, and I took full advantage of it. I let him do things to me no one else ever had. He was like forbidden fruit, and I loved it. He fucked me so hard, like a man possessed. The concrete rim of the pool scraped my upper back, but that only made me hornier. I loved a bit of pain during sex, and Dom always delivered. One hand stayed around my throat while the other gave attention to my breasts. He pinched and twisted my nipples, making me cream. I kept my eyes trained on him, watching as the lust turned to need on his face. He was so hot, with a dick that was thick and long. Whenever we were together, I knew we would end up naked. He couldn't keep his hands off me, and the feeling was mutual. His body was perfection, and if he was this delicious now, I couldn't wait to see what he would look like in a few years. I knew I would have to make sure my father didn't catch us between now and when I could get the hell out of this house. I liked my father's money and the attention his dame brought me, but I could do without his overbearing nature, along with many other things. Dominic thrust deep, hitting my back wall and sending me into another orgasm. The climaxes he could produce within me made me see stars, and sometimes I even lost consciousness. His actions became more hurried, and I felt him tense beneath my fingers, which was my signal he was about to explode. You feel so good, Dom, I crooned in his ear before biting his lobe. More. Fuck me harder. Make me come again. His strokes became even more powerful, and my eyes rolled back in my head. His breathing was ragged, as was mine, while we both tried to suck air into our lungs. 3 more pumps, and I felt his release the second it happened. He pulsed inside my pussy before collapsing against me, and we both gasped while our hearts raced. I could do this all night, and I really wanted to, but I knew it was too big a risk to take. I was taking a huge one right now just by being out in the pool like this. His fingers tapped my chin, and he lifted his head to place his lips on mine. I found myself hoping my father would take more overnight trips, or even weekends away, so I could spend more time with Dom. He was my dirty little secret. What did you call me? He asked, pulling back to frown at me. What? I didn't say anything, I replied. Did I speak out loud? Yes, Jules, you did. You just called me your dirty little secret. Clearly upset, he moved away from me, hoisting himself up on the side of the pool. God, his ass was incredible. With angry movements, he removed the condom and walked to the nearest trash can where he threw it away. My brain wasn't processing what was happening fast enough, and I could only stare at him while he retrieved his clothes and began to yank them on. Dom, what are you doing? What does it look like? I'm leaving. I'm not some toy for you to take out when you want to piss off dear old dad, Juliana. It was my turn to get out of the pool, but instead of hopping out from the side, I swam to the steps and walked out. What are you talking about? I know you aren't a toy. Why are you so angry? Why do you think I'm angry? Is this all just a game to you? His tone pissed me off, and as I angrily redressed, my mouth got away from me. No, this isn't a game, but I thought we were having fun. This isn't fun anymore. I'm done, Dom. You need to leave. His eyes narrowed as he stared at me. What are you saying, Jules? I located my robe and put it back on, creating whatever barrier between us I could. I was shaking and trying my best not to cry in front of him. I couldn't believe we had gone from fucking to fighting in a span of 30 seconds. I'm saying I'm done. We're done. It's over. I want you to leave and not come back." His head snapped back like I had slapped him. I watched his jaw clench, and I could practically feel the anger radiating from him. Well, too bad. I was angry too. I knew we would both cool off and talk things out in a day or two, but for now, I wanted him to hurt as much as he hurt me. He had a lot of nerve accusing me of playing games. "This isn't over. It will never be over, Juliana. I'm not letting you go." "This isn't a debate, Dominic. I need you to leave." He opened his mouth like he was going to speak, but then closed it. With a shake of his head, he turned and went back to the wall where he hopped over and disappeared. I half wished he would have gotten stuck on the cactus again, then mentally kicked myself for wishing him ill. I cared about Dominic a lot, and it wasn't just what he did in bed. It was him as a person. He was tough and smart, and I admired the fact that he was making something of himself, despite his shitty life circumstances. I looked toward the wall, half hoping, half dreading that he would come back. I waited several minutes, and when he didn't, I allowed the first tears to fall. Sure, I knew I had probably blown things out of proportion, but he'd hurt me with his words. Pulling the robe even tighter around myself, I flopped on the chaise lounge and stared up at the night sky. We should have been on round 2 of a fuckfest, but getting off one more time before Dom left. Instead, I was sitting here, alone and crying. "This isn't over. It will never be over, Juliana. I'm not letting you go." I hope he'd meant that. I did want him back, after we had both cooled off, of course. The more I thought about Dom and the accusatory look on his face, the more upset I became. I wavered between anger and tears. I checked my phone, which I had placed out earlier, but didn't see any text messages. I shouldn't have really expected one, but I was hoping anyway. Gradually, my tears slowed, and I found myself feeling drained and sleepy. My eyes felt like sandpaper, so I closed them for a bit, but I must have fallen asleep. I awoke, disoriented, and it took me looking around for a minute to remember where I was, what had happened, and why I was in the backyard. One tap on my phone screen, and I saw how late it really was. "Shit, I have class in the morning. I need to go to bed," I said, pausing when I heard a rustle. Another rustle, and I determined it was probably an armadillo or some other nocturnal rodent native to Nevada. I heard yet another sound and began to get a little wary. Whatever animal that was sounded large, and, deciding I did not want to be there when it exposed itself, I began to get up out of the chair. Movement caught my eye, and as I watched, a large, silhouetted figure moved into view. The figure walked closer, and as he became illuminated by the dim lights from the pool, I relaxed somewhat. "What are you doing here?" I asked. He didn't reply, merely produced something from behind his back. My eyes widened when I saw what it was.